Hello, welcome back. Last time I got my Player 1 dance pad wired up, so technically it is functional. Can't quite dance on it yet, but it does stuff. So this last little bit here is going to be kind of scattered. I say last little bit because the project is very nearly done. As of this recording, let's see, at the time that this goes up, I'm probably going to be in the very final stages of construction and like an hour or so away from actually using the thing. I'm a little behind on the video footage, so the end of construction will still take a day or two to edit and put up. But yeah, this thing is extremely close to done. So what I'm doing here is I'm wiring up the interconnect from that goes out of the Player 1 pad that will go to the Player 2 pad. So that black wire needs to be spliced. It's in a 5-way splice now. I need to add a 6th way for the interconnect. Because the black wire, as I explained before, black wire is sensor common, white is LED common, then orange, gray, yellow, and blue are sensor signal, purple, red, brown, and green are LED signal. So that's the way the colors work out. Basically, I used those colors that way in the Player 1 pad. Each one was duplicated because I had 2 of the UHID modular harness connector things on. So it's basically just the opposite as it goes out the interconnect. Since I had a duplicate of each color, it's just programmed the opposite way to those pins for the Player 2 stuff. So that's the connector I'm putting these pins into. These pins are basically exactly the same as the ones that went into the sensor connectors. I think they might actually be the same part number. They work exactly the same, so just strip wire, put it in there, crimp the same way. This should all look pretty similar. Pretty familiar is the word I was trying to use there. I knew that didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. So I'm probably holding the black wire there. Yeah, that looks right. Crimp, crimp, tear off tab, insert into housing. You know the drill. So the order of the wires going into this connector is kind of important. I planned it out a little bit. Basically, the top row starts with black and does all of the sensor signal wires. Then the bottom row starts with white and does all the LED signal wires. So I had to keep track of which was which for both this connector and the one you'll see me putting into the Player 2 pad that mates with it. Only the black and white wires are really the crucial ones. Those I don't think I can reprogram because they carry the common signal for each of the connection points on the UHID. All the rest are fully reprogrammable, and I get a lot of this wrong and do have to reprogram it, so it's a good thing I can. Wires are hard to plan out. Like, even if you have all your colors separated and mapped out exactly, it's extremely easy to lose track, and I do several times. Anyway, pin is crimped. Insert into housing. Here, familiar click, and I'll spare you from most of these others. So that's most of the sensor wires gone in. Now, something went wrong with the blue wire, the right arrow sensor. After I crimped that, I pulled on it to make sure it was secure, and it was not at all. It came right back out. I did not have any extras of these particular pins. I'm not 100% sure they're exactly the same as the sensor pins, so I didn't want to reuse one of those and hope it would just work. So I just worked at it until I managed to actually get the frayed wire reinserted. I pulled out a strand or two just to make sure it fit. Crimped it down again and called it good enough. And it did work. It just took a bunch of effort to actually get it back in there. This is why you always want to order spare parts for this sort of thing, in case something goes wrong and you have to throw one out. Anyway, blue is done. Clicks into place. White. Rest of the LED wires. So apparently that particular 10-pin connector that I chose, I got a notice after I had ordered it that it apparently is going out of production. So I would choose a different one if I were building a new one of these, I guess. But just any 10-pin connector will do. That one looked reasonably appealing. It has a similar shape to the sensor connectors. In fact, I think one of those would actually mate with it in a certain position, which doesn't really matter. Just any 10-pin connector will do. The first one of those that I ordered was this tiny, tiny, tiny little thing. I did not realize how small it was. It's just like practically microscopic. I figured it was just way too small to be practical to use. So I ordered a different one. Anyway, so what I'm doing here, this is the player 2 pad. I'm now putting on the female pins for the other side of the connector. They go on a little bit differently, and I didn't actually realize that here for the first one. So I lay the wire in from the top, just like I did before, and crimp it down. Then I notice as I'm crimping, I have a little bit of frayed wire protruding upward from there for some reason. So eventually I realized that this is a type of pin that you don't lay the wire in from the top, you actually insert it from the front, because it goes around a little tube. So I do that for the rest. But for this one, I have some extra wire to deal with somehow. It was in a really tight little space, so I couldn't really get at it with a, well, with this particular wire cutter at least. I have another now, I realize, that could have done the job. But that just didn't fit. I could not trim those off. So I crimped down the other arms of the thing. Then I think I just sort of bend the wire out of the way, because it doesn't really get in the way, just has to be not right there. Yeah, I just fold it back in on itself and it works fine. The bare metal's still making contact with the wires, so even if it's not fully inserted, it doesn't matter. As long as contact is made, it's good enough. So I'm staring at this thinking, okay, what pin goes where? This is important. I want to get my colors matched up. I did actually manage to get the colors matched up for the in between the two connectors. It's just that I had the colors mapped a little bit wrong in the UHID. That's why I had to redo stuff. So actually insert this time. Looks a lot better. That's not the right crimper. That's the crimper I want. Click that into place, and then just do that 8 more times, pretty much. The rest of this proceeded without incident, I think. So all those wires that I'm handling right now were cut to a very specific length, so that once I had them all connected to the connector housing there, I could thread them throughout the Player 2 pad and wire it up exactly the same way you saw the Player 1 pad wired before, and that also proceeds without incident. It happens exactly the same, maybe slightly more efficiently with a few things I learned, but yeah, got the Player 2 pad wired up since then. So here I actually figured out a way to cut the corner stoppers. This is a piece that has been causing me problems for a long time. I have this thin plywood here, the stuff that the square is sitting on, and I'm marking now. It's a very specific thickness that, when doubled up, matches the height of a sensor and a sensor bracket. But I had not figured out a good way to cut that thing, couldn't get any workshop time at the workshop that I had used before. So eventually I realized, you know, this stuff is so thin that maybe I don't actually need a saw to cut it. Let's try cutting instead with just a utility knife and a square. And this is, I think, 0.191 inches thick, something like that. And yeah, so I just mark out 1/2 inch from the edge on both sides because I want to cut from both sides. And as long as my measurement is right, then it should go through close enough at least. Get into a position where I can hold the square in place to act as a straight edge. It was kind of hard to do. Use my knee, use my hand, just try to keep it controlled somehow. Then use a whole bunch of muscle to drag the utility knife through this tough plywood to make a score in it. I have that piece of scrap plywood there because the utility knife just kind of comes violently off the back and would have gouged my floor or my semi-good piece of plywood that's sitting on in the front. That's the stuff that I cut my base plates and stationary panels and all the other plywood parts of that out of. And I kind of want to keep it for future use. I will actually be doing some more stuff with it this video. Actually, no, I didn't get footage for that. Whoops. But that's where I recut the two center back covers that were too short. I got that done. You'll see it in a moment. So the main reason that I flipped the thing over and cut both sides is so that they both cut cleanly. Like, I don't want a bunch of splinters coming out the bottom of that, which certainly would happen with a saw. Maybe not with a utility knife. If I just cut all the way through from one side, it actually probably would cut just fine, now that I think about it. So now that I've made a few scores on both sides, it moves, but doesn't quite break. I can feel it bending, and I work it a little bit, but it just doesn't quite cooperate the way I want it to. So score it again. Once I get that lined up with my previous score. Cut into it again. You can hear that cracking. That's the knife going all the way through. And there we go. That is cut, mostly. Last little bit just breaks off. So then I need to repeat that process 9 more times to get 10 strips like this for as many of these as I need to cut. So the second part of this involves me actually using my miter box as intended. I got a proper saw for it. That's a back saw. It has an extra piece on the top that keeps it straighter. I used that saw already. Never mind. So first step, just cut off a corner because I can't use that bit. So plywood at pretty much any thickness is pretty tough stuff. It takes a lot of effort to cut through. Doesn't help that I don't get a very big saw stroke with that. And the thing keeps wanting to move instead of just sawing, so I have to hold it very firmly against the edge there. Didn't really feel like I had a good way to clamp it down, but that might have helped if I could have. So with that corner cut out, I can measure either 2.5 inches on the short side or 3.5 inches on the long side to make a mark where the next diagonal cut needs to be. Both work out. I happened to measure the short side because it was more convenient for some reason here. And that sort of gets flipped over every time. So this diagonal cut makes one piece and starts the next one after that, basically. This was like the first or second one of these that I did, so I was still figuring out how best to hold everything, how to get it to all work together. That looks kind of okay. The edges get a little bit messy from the saw, so utility knife once again comes in handy for cleaning them up. Just all the little frayed bits on the bottom of it can just be cut right off like that. And it makes a nice, clean, smoothish piece. I need 64 of those, so I'm going to be doing this a lot. This is much later after I've gotten faster at it, realized that putting a glove on my left hand made it a lot more comfortable because it's actually a lot of stress on the fingers to be holding that thing against the barrier there. It still hurt a lot even with the glove. Because that thing just wants to move forward instead of letting me saw it. It's fighting against the saw teeth. So I figured out what was more efficient is just to clean up one edge of that, clean up the other edge of the longer piece, and at the same time measure mark a new one, and then start the next cut. So that's what I did for most of the rest of these once I got used to it. I'm not sure what, if any, power tool would be appropriate for doing this. I mean, the stuff is kind of little and thin. You saw what happened when I tried to use the miter saw to cut off the thin part of the panel risers. That just did not work at all. So I'm not sure what I would do about this. So the first couple of test pieces of this that I made with those big metal shears. They can just cut right through that plywood because it's thin enough, but they don't cut super cleanly. The saw made a cleaner cut. So I'm glad I figured out this process because I'm not sure how else I would have made these pieces. Anyway, yeah, so just do that many more times until I get all of those that I need. Make another mark for the next cut. And you pretty much get the idea. So once those were all cut, they had to be glued together. Like I said, this plywood has to be doubled up to get to the appropriate thickness. So I have this bottle of wood glue, which I've almost used up entirely now. I might need to go for some more before I do the rest of my stuff I need to do tomorrow. It ran out much quicker than I expected. So I just laid out a bunch in front of me, put glue on half of each of them, and then starting from the same end I started from before, so the glue takes a moment to, get sticky, dry out, whatever. Put them together, hold them for a while, wipe off any excess glue. I was using a little too much there. It is hard to get just the right amount of glue on stuff. It's always either too much or not nearly enough. So I err on the side of too much, which is probably why my bottle of glue is running out. I can just wipe off the excess if it comes out the sides. So hold there for a while. The glue instructions recommended clamping that for 30 minutes. I wasn't going to do that for each one of those, so maybe they're not bound together as tightly as they could have been. Yeah, I just sat and held them together with my fingers for like a minute or so, and then let them dry out. It's a strong enough bond. It doesn't need to be super strong. So here's a table saw, a different one. Another family member happened to have one and let me use it. So I'm recutting the back cover pieces that needed just a little bit trimmed off of them. And the little pieces that come off of it went into the gap between the saw blade and the table, so they're just trapped down there now. And that's where they'll stay forever. This one seemed noisier than the other one I used. But it did the job really well. This was pretty quick. I just needed to make those 4 cuts. And also cut out the new centerpieces, which I wasn't able to record video because, people were around. We were figuring out how to do it. They were helping me. I didn't want to deal with a video camera at the same time. So miter saw cuts out those corners that also needed to come off. This one has a laser guide on it, which kinda sorta semi-works, but not exactly. It doesn't line up perfectly with the blade. Unfortunately, these cuts I'm making here are not the last cuts I need to make in that thing. I thought they were, but I apparently miscalculated again. And yeah, so this saw is owned by my parents. They offered to let me just take it home with me because they don't use it too much, and I was finding plenty of use for it. So I said, no, I'm done with these cuts. I don't need it. I should have taken the saw because I did need it. Alright, so those are the 2 pieces that I'm working with that I cut out of the sheet of plywood for the for the center back cover pieces. This should look semi-familiar because I've done this before, trying to put the semicircular holes in the edges of them. It was a lot harder this time. I did not do it as well as the previous time. The problem that I kept having here was that the drill bit would want to go into one piece of wood or the other. So it went into that far one and kind of like just slipped out of the near one. So that would put much more of the hole in one place than the other. And that's not what I want. So I kind of tried to work it a little bit, kind of pull it toward me to see if it could chew up the wood in that way. I made a mess of it. Eventually I kind of get this done. In all my worrying about the hole's horizontal position, from this perspective, I actually get it kind of in the wrong vertical position and have to correct for that later. I wish I hadn't had to redo these pieces. They turned out worse the second time. But I managed to get them to work, but they're not quite as good as they were. So drill in just enough so I can see the circle mark, check with the ruler, see if it's good enough. It's good enough. So just do it. Two halves come out, along with a whole bunch of sawdust. So putting them together, I can see that the hole went reasonably close to in the middle, so my corrections did kind of work for that. So unclamp, clear off sawdust, switch those pieces around, and do the same thing. Get them aligned carefully, reclamp. That clamp right there is kind of weird. It has a thing that slides up and down on it. So you sort of slide it into place, then turn the screw, and just by the by I don't know, friction or something, it actually clamps into place. It's different from the other one I have over there. I'm not sure I like it as much. Like it's real convenient to get it clamped into place, but it doesn't feel like it holds as firmly. So I'm trying a lot harder to make this tool punch into the right place. So once again, it wanted to go into one piece of wood and not the other. So I sort of try to do it at an angle a little bit to get it to go over onto the other one a little more. It kind of works. Moved the hole pretty much where it needed to be. Alright, and that one's done. Holes look clean from here. I learned later that they are slightly off center, but they're close enough. Needed a little bit of cleanup on the bottom, but that's fine. Easy enough to do. So, like I said, I completed the player 2 pad wiring, so here I'm connecting the two together for the first time to try it out. I have not reconfigured my UHID yet. Watch the LEDs on the left pad from this perspective. That's the player 2 pad. Oh, right, not yet. So I connect the interconnect, then I plug in the USB cable. I have connected to a convenient laptop there. You can see those LEDs are on at like half brightness. 3 of them at least, not that one. For some reason, the way the device works, if I don't have a pin assigned to LED control, and I do have an LED connected to it, apparently a little bit of signal, a little bit of electricity runs through it, so the LED lights up like halfway or a quarter of the way. So if you're curious how UHID programming works, here's some footage of me doing that. Played at quadruple speed because it went kind of slow. Had to keep looking at my reference to see what went to what. So this is uconfig is the name of the application. The way I recorded this did not capture the submenus, but I'm selecting gamepad buttons and stuff from them. Down action, normal primary, up action, clear. You can specify all sorts of crazy stuff. Like you could have it press the button on the up and clear it on the down if you wanted, stuff like that. And then for the ones that are LEDs, I choose the pin that goes to the LED and then associate it with the switch that I want to control that LED. So that's how that's done. So I reprogrammed the whole thing, which I was hoping would fix all my problems. It didn't quite. So let's run this test again. USB cable in. That stuff all works. So we're good, right? All the new stuff works. For some reason, that particular pin did not take the configuration that I gave to it. It was kind of weird. Try another sensor connector to make sure that's working. It was, just the LED for some reason was not set up the way it needed to be. So I went back into the uconfig utility and redid that one pin, and then it took its configuration and all worked. I don't know why I had to redo it, but for some reason I did. Anyway, so that right there is the final configuration of the UHID. Don't ever have to touch it again. It can stay in the pad and be and do its job. So right, a little bit of a shorter episode today. I have a lot more footage of stuff. It just didn't quite fit in here. So yeah, like I said, at the time that this goes up, I'll basically have the thing just about in its final usable state. And yeah, I'll catch up with the footage in a couple of days of getting it all the way there. I'll see you then.